Hello and welcome to episode 10 of SquashWarp. We are joining Elsted Kerman as he attempts re-entry in the space shuttle that we have been using. This is the Galahad Mark II-B, and we're still getting temperature gauges on re-entry. Even though I replaced those original B9 wings with the B9 procedural wings, which have a higher heat tolerance, we are still getting temperature gauges as we re-enter, but as long as they don't go up any further, we should be fine. I'm trying to do a bit of a skip here on the atmosphere, but our descent is just still increasing. We even tried burning the engines there a bit. But this thing is dropping like a brick, despite Elsted's best efforts. He even turns on his control surfaces, which seems like it might be a good idea now that he's in the atmosphere. Yeah, we turned those off and completely forgot about it. It's not his fault. It was totally my fault. Yeah, so trying to fight the aerodynamics of this vehicle, trying to pull up so that we can get a little bit more range, but we're still going to come up short of the Space Center. And we tried a different re-entry profile because we knew that the last time we didn't quite make it. We get a little closer this time. We're definitely making it onto the right continent, but there's no way we're making it over those mountains there. And we came in an inclined orbit because this is the same plane that rendezvoused with that Slider 1 probe, so we had to be on a slightly inclined orbit in order to meet up with it. Whoa, losing control a little bit there. We seem to have some strange roll behavior. Let's try pumping some monopropellant forward just to get ourselves a little bit more stable. You know, and I'm going directly towards my target, which is the flag at Kerbal Space Center, but it's not going to stay that way. We're going to lose speed if we stay at that angle, so Elsted gives in. His reputation is safe. We know he can get anything back to the surface. We are not going to judge him. Besides, he was the one who landed the Galahad Mark I, which is the Mark I airplane parts. He landed it on the runway on his first try, so he won't let us forget that he did that, so this is fine. Deploying the landing gear and getting ready for drone shoots, and coming to a nice stop next to a patch of grass. Out at the Dolgoldor space station, we're doing a little bit of maintenance and noticing that, well, our probe core has a friend. We've got one of the octo cores down there, but then there's a surface attached control core there from the modular rocket systems pack there. And this was just me in the vehicle assembly building trying to cover my bases and duplicating things. So Wiltrid Kerman comes out and attempts to take that off, except she forgot her drill, so that's embarrassing. But she gives us a second one of those little backflips just to make herself feel better. And I'm trying to remember how to do this. We press G, we grab it, and then we have to hold H to reattach it. But that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to grab it and put it in my bag. So it just takes me a second to remember that you hold G, you grab it, and you drag it over into your inventory. Kerbal inventory system, incredible mod. Goes with the Kerbal attachment system and makes the game really interesting for the Kerbals. So moving right along, we also need to double check that all our systems are functioning, and we need to do a correction. So we've set the moon as our target, because it is exactly equatorial in its orbit. And with that, we can do a correction burn to change our inclination so that the Space Center launches never have to worry about their launching into the correct plane. Since the Space Center is exactly on the equator, we will do the same. This isn't essential. It's totally workable to wait for a launch window when your Space Center is directly under one of the ascending or descending nodes. But since we've got so much fuel on this stage at the back here, and we are not, in fact, taking this thing to Minmus, we want to do something with this fuel before we jettison this stage. So we've corrected our inclination, and now we just need to set up a burn to circularize. Remember, our space station had to rendezvous with the space plane, which had used most of its fuel. It wasn't stranded, but it couldn't do any kind of rendezvous. It had used most of its fuel picking up the Slider 1 probe, which had moon science. So by picking a spot, and I actually do a little trick where you add a maneuver and then you pull retrograde on the maneuver until you've killed all your orbital velocity. Not because you intend to come crashing down to Kerbin, but because that tells you the altitude at that particular spot on the orbit. And when you know that, you can pick what altitude you want to circularize at, and then adjust accordingly. So we are going for 125 by 125 kilometers about. We'll correct with our RCS. And I like that altitude because it's nice and low, so it's pretty efficient to get there, and the orbits are relatively fast, but it's high enough that you're always outside the 120 kilometer time warp limit, which means you can go faster and you can wait for phasing orbits more efficiently. Moving on, we have an alarm that's telling us this Cooter 2 probe is about to change, but hey, what is this? This is our Cooter 1 probe, which was supposed to be going to the moon. So what happened was we never set an alarm for the Cooter 1 probe going to the moon. So it had its close encounter, it went under the moon's south pole, and then got kicked up into this very strange orbit here. So we set up a maneuver for this first, because we do want to eventually get to the moon. And I've cut out most of this maneuver node editing because it was jumping all over the place. I don't know if it was just really sensitive, but we get an encounter with the moon again in relatively short order. This was supposed to have been done long ago, but as it is, we'll get there eventually. We just have to wait. So now the one that's going to Minmus will actually get there sooner. Remember, these are our mapping missions. We've already mapped both the moons with the radar scan. This has the multispectral sensor from ScanSat, which will tell us about the biomes of the moon in Minmus. So we hop back over to Cooter 2, which is where we thought we were supposed to be. And this probe is about to enter Minmus's sphere of influence. So now that little crisis is dealt with, we can go ahead and warp on in, after adjusting how bright I think I want it to be. That's a nice thing to have, right? I wish I had that in regular life. I guess that's called lights and flashlights. Regardless, we're going to set up a node to circularize. This is all standard probe exploration fare. We're going into a polar orbit, and we're aiming for 250 kilometers, and we'll circularize when we get out there. 250 kilometers is the recommended best altitude for this scanner. I suspect that different bodies will have different actual optimum altitudes, but that's the altitude that is high enough that you're not really suffering from the detection cone being really narrow, but it's low enough that you do many passes and you therefore can cover the whole planet as quickly as possible. We may find that this is, ooh, nice animation there for deploying that sensor there. We may find that this orbit has some kind of resonance with Minmus, but instead of doing math, you know, the 10 seconds it'll take to look at the orbital display and figure out whether this is a good altitude, I'm just going to trust what the part says and warp along and see how it goes. There are times in this game when I want to concentrate and take notes and do a little math and really plan things, and there are other times with probes that I just kind of go as I go, you know? So here's the Slider 2 probe as an example. These have become sample return missions on the fly. Same idea with this one, although I don't think we're going to have to aero brake with this because we've got so much more fuel left. Going to Minmus doesn't cost much more than going to the moon, and landing on Minmus is much less expensive as far as fuel goes. So we've got more delta V to work with on this thing. We're just going to reduce until our periaps matches up with the space station, which is now at a 0 degree inclination orbit here. In all honesty, I built these probes because I wanted an excuse to build a space plane. That was an improvement on the first one. So I unlocked the Mark II B9 spaceplane parts, and I wanted to make something with it, so we came up with a couple of probes that looked like they could go to the moons. And then once they got out there, instead of transmitting the science, I said, oh hey, it would be fun to do a return mission, so that's what's been going on now. So anyway, back over at the space station, we're taking a look and realizing that we never started researching the data that's in our lab. So that's silly. Let's turn it on. Oh, our electricity costs. So now that the lab is on, we are running out of electricity partway through the night, and the night is only the amount of time we spend on the dark side of Kerbin here. So we're going to need to have more batteries sent up. We also need to be able to deploy those extra solar panels, which means we need to get rid of this extra stage, because right now it looks bad when the solar panels clip through the sides of that fairing base. So Dunbury Kerman is going to put a docking port on the side of this so that we can reattach it later and get the fuel out of it. We can't transfer the fuel right now. Dunbury is our new pilot, and this is his first time using a wrench on the side of a spaceship. So now we can decouple. I really could have sworn I put a probe core on that thing. So I'm not really sure what happened, but luckily Wiltrid just took one off the space station earlier. We had a spare. So she's going to head out with her electric drill, and we keep accidentally pausing the game when we try to escape out of the KIS menu. Let's attach that. Attach that. There we go. Now we should have control, but we don't. So why we don't, I don't know. This is where, see, I'm rewatching this as I'm narrating, and there is a transmitter right attached to the side of that that stage there. But at the time, I thought maybe it's not working because we don't have signal. I could have just looked at the indicator, but I'm looking around the space station trying to find our antenna because I thought we had an extra one, so we could grab that and put it on the space stage there. Now, watching it, I know that's not the problem. But hey, now we can deploy the solar panels without clipping through the parts, and it looks quite nice there. And we're going to replenish our supply of electricity relatively quickly with that. Oh, there's the antenna. Yeah, so I send Wiltrid back out again to go get that antenna and put it on the side of the launch stage. I guess that was the circularization stage. We used that to finish up orbital insertion, and let's drag this into our contain. Yeah, there we go. We've got it in our pack now. We got it in our inventory. Let's go down, even though, you know, now I know that it's not going to work, but at the time I really thought, hey, if I just slap this on there, everything will work. There's batteries, there's a probe core. I have no idea. I still haven't figured it out, honestly, but it doesn't really bother me, so it's fine. It didn't work. We actually did have control. I think that perhaps the transmitters were not correctly set up, because we can turn the engine on and off. So we have some control, we just have no ability to turn RCS on. So what we're going to do instead is, well, let's deploy that because that looks better. What we're going to do instead is just deorbit this. It's a waste of fuel, but and also all these parts. Maybe this will lower my part count. I just took everything that was in all our extra inventories and slapped them on the side of this craft, and it's now dead in space. So we're just going to burn the engine until it's going to return to Kerbin, and we're not even going to watch that. We're going to go back to space station and double check, but it looks like it's not just the solar panels. We actually don't have enough battery capacity on this thing. It's actually worse now because we threw away some batteries with that stage. So here is our next launch, the Ganges, again on the same lifter that launched the Amazon spacecraft. I've made the lower stages into a subassembly, and we're just going to keep reusing them until we build something that's too heavy for it. So on this vehicle we have Franis, Malfry, Radrian, Jedmi, Virulin, and Ribley Kerman, and we are going to Minmus. This is a pretty heavy lander. It's got way more Delta V than we could ever need for a Minmus mission, so we're going to use it to go to multiple biomes. But for now, we're just trying to get into the correct inclination. I've got a little window up. As we drop those boosters, we are trying to put ourselves on the same inclination as Minmus, just to make going out to meet up with it a little bit easier. And so I'm kind of pointing north and south, just trying to figure out exactly the right ascent angle for us. And we end up burning kind of shallow, but we've got plenty of Delta V, and we've got a second stage for the transfer. And the spacecraft itself has pretty high thrust and a lot of fuel in it. Separating those fairings, here we have the spacecraft. The whole thing is built around a truss structure. So we've got a couple of the B9 Mark II crew containers with 4 each, and the one lander can. We are not at complete capacity with our Kerbals, so we've got 6 Kerbals, 2 of each type, deploying our solar panels and riding up to our circularization burn, which I time warp through because I guess my time is valuable here. We've got some life support down on the bottom. We've got 2 of every science experiment, and we just need to set up for, we're going to change our inclination just slightly because we didn't quite get it exact, but we're only needing a little bit of a change here. So these guys have never been to Minmus before. We have not sent Kerbals to Minmus. And at this point, this is partially an attempt to get more science. It's also, the reason we're sending so many Kerbals is because we want to level up our Kerbals' experience points. In particular, if we can get Virulin and Ribley Kerman, our scientists, to the next experience level, we can do our science research more quickly at the orbital lab. And we want that. We want to get more science because this tech tree is enormous. So, as I've mentioned before, I've really not had an opportunity to play the game much in the time since the new science lab mechanics really were implemented. Hey guys, how you all doing? Setting up our raster prop monitor displays there. I don't plan to really abuse the laboratories, but I do intend to make use of just a couple of them. So we've got 3 different crew containers, so we can take as many as 3 copies of every experiment and bring them back. One set can come home immediately, one set can get processed at this lab, and another set can be stored for a future mission. We might send a lab to a moon and do some processing there. It really depends on well, it depends on how things are progressing, depends on whether or not we are struggling to get science. Our tech tree is large, but we've got so many bodies to visit, so we may not ever need to do that. I have the Surface Bases parts pack, and there's a lab included in that, and I think it has similar functionality to the stock laboratory, so we might use that at some point. We've set up our burn, and we just need to set our timer, and we are going to do that correction partway through. But for now, it's time to switch over to Cooter 1, who is finally on its way to the moon for the 2nd time. We flew by the moon and we didn't even know it. So just some terminal guidance here as we come in. I want to get on a 90-degree inclination thereabouts. With all the probes we've been deploying from the cargo bay of our spaceplane, this series has really become one of managing different maneuvers of many different crafts throughout the Kerbin sphere of influence. But I think we're going to be transitioning away from that to longer-term missions because we'll be getting ready to just do manned missions exclusively at the moons of Kerbin and start sending our probes out further afield where the time between their burns will be much longer, by hundreds of days sometimes. I've actually removed the Outer Planets mod, not because I don't intend to use it, but because I just feel that I'm waiting for a load time and it's something that isn't directly affecting my gameplay yet. I'll put it back in as soon as I think I'm going to actually be able to make it to one of the planets. And I noticed, and I think it was after this particular recording, that Custom Barn Kits and Outer Planets mod had been making changes to the antenna ranges, but the changes that were being made were balanced for a stock career game, and it makes a lot of sense in that context. But because this is a science sandbox, I already have the full tracking center upgrade, and everything was way overpowered. So I ended up taking those out, and I will treat those as upgrades as I move along when I reinstall them. Let's switch back over to Ganges and do that correction burn. Malfry Kerman is letting Frannis do the flying right now. She previously had only flown on airplane once in our save here. Radrian, I think, is a new face. as well as Jedney. I don't believe he's joined us for any flights yet. Ribley, we know, he was the one who put the flag at the end of the runway. And Virulent, of course, of great fame, is our moonwalk endurance record. She spent an hour exactly on EVA on the moon walking back from the highlands in the previous episode. So we set ourselves up, burning in various directions, for a nice equatorial encounter with Minmus. We will pick our landing site in the future, but for now, we need to switch over to the Slider 2 probe, which is about to reach periaps. And we're set up for our braking burn. This should put us into a stable orbit around Kerbin and hopefully get us an encounter with the space station. It's kind of off. We'll burn the engine until it looks right, and then we'll use the thrust limiter to burn more precisely until it looks even more right. And then we'll turn the thrust limiter down even more and get it extremely precise. Really, I get so obsessive with getting these things down to, under 0.7 kilometers here. Could probably save myself a lot of time in gameplay, but there's a lot of fun in getting that encounter exactly correct. And apparently I decided it was good enough. We're going to time warp around, and then it breaks. So after all that work, right, it decides that actually now our closest encounter is somewhere else. We set up another little maneuver, and I've cut the rest out because you've just seen me fiddle with maneuver nodes too many times. Hey, there's the space station off in the distance, and we're coming in, and we just have enough fuel that this is going to be perfectly fine. We burn a little late, but that's okay. Get ourselves pointed correctly. Let's burn until we're slowly approaching the station. We can see we can get a very precise encounter with a little main engine just by pushing that retrograde marker around until it's on top of the anti-target node. And now we're close enough, I'm going to go ahead and kill our speed, and we can send a Kerbal out to go get it. Who are we going to send? Carrie, you're our volunteer. And he does his nice little sideways jump and comes on over to it. Since we don't need a scientist to do this, the scientists are hard at work in the lab. I don't really want to take them out. And Carrie has volunteered. So, approaching the probe, which is actually quite large compared to a Kerbal, although it's this tiny little thing. He just has 4 science experiments to grab. And that's really all that work just for 4 little science experiments. And this thing came from Minmus, so we're about to be extracting all of that and more with the crewed landing that's coming up pretty soon. But this science is here now, and we're going to make use of it. We're going to get it in the lab, get it processed. And, well, one of them won't get processed because it's a duplicate, but we'll send that one home on the next mission that comes up. We need to mount a mission to send ourselves some more batteries. It occurs to me now, of course, that we could easily have grabbed the batteries off of this probe and gotten a little bit of extra battery capacity on the space station. But I really wasn't thinking during this play period, it seems, at least when it comes to how to maintain this space station. It does look nice now that we've oriented it in this direction here, so that our solar panels can always be facing the sun. And we will set up that science to be processed in the lab. Now that Galahad is on its way to Minmus, we are free to start sending resupply missions to this station. So we will be watching that as well as our Minmus science landing in a future episode. Thank you for joining me.